Most people wake up, check their phone, and their mood for the day is already decided by one thing: how their partner texted back, whether they seemed distant last night, or whether things feel off between them. A single short reply can ruin an entire afternoon. A missed call can turn into hours of quiet worry. This is not weakness. It is a pattern that almost everyone falls into without noticing, because we are taught that real love means becoming inseparable, that our joy should rise and fall with theirs. But the Stoics understood something most people never stop to examine. When your peace of mind depends entirely on another person's mood, words, or presence, you have handed over control of your own life. And that is exactly where suffering begins. If this resonates with you, hit like and subscribe. This channel is built for people who want calm, clear thinking in a world that constantly pulls at your peace. Number 1. The hidden cost of making one person your everything. When one person becomes the center of your entire emotional world, you don't just love them more deeply. You quietly hand them the keys to your inner state. Every glance, every delay in a text message, every subtle change in tone becomes a signal you must decode, and your nervous system reacts before your mind even catches up. This is not because you're insecure or broken. It is simply what happens when a finite, imperfect human being is asked to carry a role that was never meant for one person alone. The sole source of your joy, your validation, and your sense of safety in the world. The weight of that role is enormous, and no relationship, however strong, can bear it forever without cracking somewhere. The Stoics had a name for this trap: mistaking something outside your control for the foundation of your happiness. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from the judgments we attach to them. And nowhere is this more visible than in relationships. If your partner is happy, you're at peace. If they're distant, your whole day collapses. You didn't choose this consciously. It built up slowly, through years of being told that true love means merging two lives into one so completely that separateness starts to feel like abandonment. But separateness is not abandonment. It is simply the natural boundary between two individual minds, each with its own moods, its own bad days, and its own inner weather that has nothing to do with you. Consider how this plays out in ordinary life. You come home tired, hoping for warmth, and instead you get a partner who is short-tempered because of something completely unrelated to you. A hard day at work, poor sleep, a personal worry they haven't shared yet. If your entire emotional stability rests on their behavior, that one interaction can define your whole evening. You replay it, you analyze it, you lose hours of peace over something that was never really about you at all. This is the quiet, invisible cost of over-reliance. You stop living your own life and start reacting to someone else's internal weather report, moment by moment, without even realizing you've stopped steering your own ship. There's also a slower, more corrosive cost that builds over years: the erosion of your own identity. When one relationship becomes your only measure of a good life, your hobbies fade, your friendships thin out, your personal goals get quietly postponed until things settle down with your partner. You start speaking in we so often that you forget what I used to want. This isn't romantic devotion. It's a slow disappearance of the self that Stoic philosophy warns against directly. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to return to his own reasoning, his own principles, his own inner citadel, precisely because it is so easy to lose yourself in the currents of other people's lives, especially the people closest to you. This dependency also quietly damages the relationship it's meant to protect. When you need someone to be happy in order to feel okay yourself, you're no longer relating to them as a free, separate human being. You're relating to them as a source of supply, almost like a utility you cannot function without. This creates pressure that most partners feel even if they can't name it, a subtle sense that they are responsible for managing your emotional state, that your calm depends on their performance. Over time, this pressure breeds resentment on one side and anxiety on the other, turning what should be a partnership between two whole people into something closer to a transaction of emotional maintenance. The deepest cost, though, is what it does to your relationship with reality itself. Seneca wrote that we should hold the things we love the way we hold anything on loan, fully, warmly, but without the illusion that they belong to us forever or that our peace depends on keeping them exactly as they are. A partner can leave through choice, through circumstance, or through death, and none of these outcomes are within your control. If your entire happiness has been staked on their permanent presence, you have built your life on ground that was never solid to begin with. Recognizing this isn't pessimism. It's the beginning of building something far more durable, a peace that comes from within you, that no external event can fully take away. Number 2, what Stoicism actually teaches about external things. At the heart of Stoic philosophy sits one of the most practical ideas ever developed for human peace of mind, the distinction between what is up to us and what is not. Epictetus opens his entire teaching with this single distinction. Our judgments, our choices, our will are up to us. Other people's opinions, actions, moods, and even their presence in our lives are not. A partner's love, however real and committed, ultimately falls into the category of things not fully in your control, because it depends on their free will, their circumstances, and countless factors outside your influence. This doesn't mean love is fake or unreliable. It means building your entire sense of self on something inherently uncertain is a mistake in reasoning, not just a risk in romance. The Stoics called things like health, reputation, wealth, and relationships externals, not because they don't matter, but because they're not fully within our command, and therefore cannot be the true foundation of a good life. This is a radical idea in a culture that constantly tells us the opposite, that finding the one will complete us, that love is the ultimate solution to inner unrest. Stoicism doesn't say relationships are unimportant. It says something more precise and more useful. Relationships are preferred externals, genuinely good things worth pursuing and valuing. But your inner peace, your virtue, and your judgment must remain the true center, because those are the only things that cannot be taken from you by circumstance. This framework changes how you interpret everyday friction in a relationship. If your partner is in a bad mood, a person who has internalized this Stoic distinction doesn't immediately absorb that mood as their own crisis. They recognize their mood is theirs, it belongs to their judgments and their day, and my task is to respond with patience and clarity, not to be swallowed by it. This is not coldness or detachment in the negative sense. It is actually what allows for more warmth, because you can be present with your partner's difficulty without drowning in it yourself. You become a stable presence precisely because you're not outsourcing your stability to them. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire and facing constant political and personal turmoil, wrote to himself constantly about not letting external events dictate his inner state. He reminded himself that the things happening around him, betrayal, loss, disappointment, could not disturb his mind unless he allowed his judgment to be disturbed by them. Applied to relationships, this means separating the event, "My partner seemed cold this morning," from the judgment, "This means something is deeply wrong and I am not loved." Most emotional suffering in relationships comes not from what actually happened, but from the story we immediately attach to it. And that story is always within our control to examine and revise. There's also a deeper teaching here about the nature of control itself. You cannot control whether your partner stays interested, whether they grow in the same direction as you, whether life circumstances pull you apart, or even whether they wake up in a good mood. What you can control is your own effort, your own honesty, your own capacity to communicate and to respond with reason rather than panic. Seneca compared external goods to items lent to us by fortune. We may use them, enjoy them, even love them deeply, but we must hold them with open hands, knowing fortune can reclaim what it lent at any moment. This isn't meant to make you love less. It's meant to help you love without the constant undercurrent of fear that quietly poisons so many relationships. Ultimately, Stoicism teaches that the only truly secure possession a person has is their own character, their judgments, their choices, their inner discipline. Everything else, including the people we love most, exists in a state of borrowed time and uncertain control. This isn't a tragic view of life. It's actually the most stable foundation available, because it locates your peace in the one place that can never be taken from you by circumstance, rejection, distance, or loss. Once you understand this distinction clearly, you stop asking your partner to be your unshakable ground, and you start building that ground within yourself, which paradoxically makes you far more capable of real, lasting love. Number 3. The difference between love and dependency. Love and dependency can look identical from the outside. Both involve wanting someone close, caring deeply about their well-being, feeling a pull toward them. But internally, they operate on completely different logic. Love says, I want good things for you, and I choose to build a life alongside you. Dependency says, I need you to be a certain way so that I can feel okay. The Stoic distinction between virtue and externals maps directly onto this difference. Real love is an expression of your character, something you give from a place of stability. Dependency is a demand you place on someone else to manage a stability you haven't built for yourself. Learning to tell these apart is one of the most important emotional skills a person can develop. One clear sign of dependency is how you feel when your partner is simply unavailable, not distant, not upset, just occupied with their own life. If a few hours without contact triggers real anxiety, if their absorption in work or friends or personal time feels like a small threat, this is often dependency speaking, not love. A person operating from Stoic self-sufficiency can miss their partner, look forward to seeing them, and still remain fully at peace during the hours apart, because their peace was never actually stored in the other person's proximity to begin with. This doesn't mean they care less. Often, people who need less from a relationship end up giving more to it because their care isn't tangled up with fear. Dependency also tends to distort communication. When your emotional stability rides on your partner's every word and reaction, you start managing conversations not to express truth, but to protect your own fragile equilibrium. You avoid honest disagreement because conflict feels dangerous. You over-apologize, or you go silent, or you seek constant reassurance, not because the relationship requires it, but because your inner state cannot tolerate uncertainty. Epictetus taught that freedom comes from wanting only what is truly within your power to secure. And paradoxically, a person who doesn't desperately need their partner's approval is able to speak far more honestly, which almost always leads to a stronger, more respectful relationship over time. There's also a difference in how each state handles change. Love, understood in the Stoic sense, can adapt. Partners grow, circumstances shift, seasons of a relationship change, and love that is rooted in genuine care and respect can flex with these changes without collapsing. Dependency resists change violently because any shift threatens the entire emotional structure a person has built their life on. This is why breakups or even minor distancing feel catastrophic to someone in a dependent dynamic. It's not simply sadness at losing someone they love, it's the terrifying collapse of their only source of stability. Seneca often wrote about the fragility of a life built entirely on things outside our control, and few things illustrate this more starkly than watching someone's entire sense of self unravel because a relationship changed shape. Genuine Stoic-informed love actually requires you to see your partner clearly, as a separate person with their own inner life, their own struggles, their own right to have off days that have nothing to do with you. Dependency, by contrast, often flattens the other person into a function, someone who exists to keep you emotionally regulated. This is rarely intentional or even conscious, but it changes how you treat them. You may resent their bad moods, not because you're unkind, but because their mood threatens your equilibrium. Real love has room for someone else's full humanity, including the inconvenient parts. Dependency has room only for the version of them that keeps you comfortable. The practical test the Stoics would offer is simple. Can you still access calm, purpose, and a sense of your own worth on a day when your partner is distracted, tired, or simply not giving you attention? If the answer is yes, you're likely operating from love, a strong, healthy attachment that adds to an already full life. If the answer is no, if your entire day tips over based on their availability, this is a signal worth taking seriously, not as a failure, but as useful information. It tells you exactly where the inner work needs to happen, not in changing your partner, but in rebuilding the foundation you've been asking them to stand on for you. Number 4, building your own foundation of inner peace. If happiness cannot rightly depend on another person, the natural question becomes, where does it come from instead? The Stoics answer this clearly and consistently. Happiness, or what they called eudaimonia, comes from living in accordance with reason and virtue, from cultivating your own judgment, character, and daily discipline. This is not an abstract idea reserved for philosophers and togas. It means practically that your sense of a good day should be tied to things you actually control. Whether you acted with patience, whether you did honest work, whether you treated people well, whether you kept your commitments to yourself. Building this foundation takes time, but unlike a partner's mood, it is available to you every single day, regardless of what anyone else does. One of the most practical Stoic tools for this is the morning and evening reflection that Marcus Aurelius practiced throughout his life. Each morning, he reminded himself what kind of day to expect and how he intended to meet it with reason rather than reaction. Each evening, he reviewed his actions honestly, without harsh self-judgment, but with clear accountability. Applied to modern life, this might mean starting your day by asking what you want to accomplish and how you want to show up, independent of how your partner is behaving, and ending your day by reviewing whether you stayed true to your own values. Over weeks and months, this builds a private, internal sense of accomplishment that no one else can hand you or take away. Another core practice is deliberately investing in the parts of your life that exist independently of your relationship. Friendships, physical health, meaningful work, personal projects, and solitary reflection. This isn't about creating emotional distance from your partner. It's about restoring the full shape of a life that a healthy relationship should support, not replace. When you have multiple sources of meaning, a hobby you love, friends who know you well, work you find purposeful, quiet time you protect, no single disappointment can topple your entire emotional structure. A rough patch with your partner becomes one difficult part of full life, rather than the collapse of your entire world, simply because your world was never built on one pillar alone. Seneca often wrote to his friend Lucilius about the importance of returning to yourself, of spending time alone, not as punishment, but as practice, learning to sit with your own thoughts without needing external noise or company to feel at ease. This capacity, built deliberately through solitude, journaling, and quiet reflection, becomes the quiet root system of emotional independence. A person who has practiced being alone with their own mind, who has learned to find that time tolerable and even valuable, is far less likely to panic when a partner is unavailable, distracted, or simply needs space. The strength to be alone, ironically, is often what makes someone a calmer, more secure presence when they are together with someone else. Building this foundation also means developing what the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the practice of calmly considering in advance that difficult things can happen. Distance, disagreement, even loss. This is not pessimism. It is preparation that removes the sharp edge of fear from daily life. A person who has honestly considered that their partner is a separate human being with their own free will, who may not always be present, who may change over time, approaches the relationship with more presence and gratitude, not less. Ironically, Accepting impermanence tends to deepen appreciation for what you currently have, rather than diminishing it, because you stop taking the relationship for granted as something permanently guaranteed. Ultimately, this inner foundation is built the same way any skill is built, through small, repeated choices rather than one dramatic breakthrough. It's choosing to finish your own work before checking your phone for a reply. It's choosing to sit with a moment of insecurity, using reason instead of immediately seeking reassurance. It's choosing to maintain your friendships, your routines, your personal goals, even during the excitement of a new relationship. None of these choices are glamorous, but together they build the quiet, unshakable center that Stoic philosophy has always pointed toward. A center strong enough that love can be added to your life as something beautiful, rather than desperately required as the only thing holding you together. Number 5. How this makes you a better partner, not a worse one. There is a common fear that this kind of self-sufficiency will make someone cold, distant, or less loving. That reducing dependency somehow reduces devotion. Stoic philosophy suggests the opposite is true. When you're not relying on your partner to regulate your entire emotional state, you become far more capable of showing up for them consistently, because your ability to be present isn't conditional on your own anxiety being managed first. A person who is emotionally self-sufficient can offer comfort during their partner's hard days without secretly needing that comfort to be reciprocated immediately. This creates a kind of steady generosity that dependent relationships rarely allow, because dependency is always, at some level, keeping score. Consider how differently conflict unfolds when one person isn't terrified of the relationship ending. A person grounded in Stoic self-sufficiency can hear hard feedback from their partner, even criticism, without their entire identity feeling threatened, because their sense of worth was never fully outsourced to the relationship's approval. This allows for actual honesty, actual repair, actual growth as a couple, instead of conflict avoidance driven by fear. Epictetus taught that freedom comes precisely from this kind of internal security. When you no longer need external validation to feel whole, you can engage with difficult truths without flinching, which is exactly the quality that allows relationships to deepen rather than stagnate in avoidance. This self-sufficiency also removes an enormous, often invisible burden from your partner. Someone who does not need you to manage their entire emotional world is someone your partner can be honest with, can be tired around, can be imperfect near, without fear of causing a crisis. Many relationships quietly suffer because one partner feels they must constantly manage the other's moods, tiptoe around potential upset, and perform stability even when they don't feel stable themselves. When you build your own foundation, you free your partner from this exhausting task. And in doing so, you create the actual conditions for closeness, because people draw closer to those they don't have to protect from their own honest humanity. Marcus Aurelius wrote about treating the people in his life with justice and clear-eyed kindness, seeing them accurately rather than through the distorted lens of what he needed from them. A partner who sees you accurately, your real moods, your real struggles, your real self, rather than only the version of you they need to feel secure, is a partner who can actually know you. This kind of seeing requires the seer to be standing on solid ground themselves. Someone anxious and dependent is often too preoccupied with their own emotional survival to fully perceive the other person. Self-sufficiency, then, isn't a wall between two people. It's actually the precondition for real intimacy, because it clears away the fog of constant self-protection. There's also the matter of longevity. Relationships that rest on two whole, self-sufficient people tend to weather hardship far better than relationships built on mutual dependency. Because hardship, job loss, illness, grief, long stretches of distance, inevitably tests whether each person can function without perfect emotional supply from the other. Seneca often noted that adversity reveals character, and this is just as true in partnership as anywhere else. Couples who have each built inner resilience can support one another through real difficulty without the whole structure collapsing, because neither person needs the other to be constantly available and constantly stable in order to keep functioning themselves. In the end, becoming your own source of peace doesn't diminish what you offer a partner. It transforms it from something fragile and conditional into something genuinely generous. You go from asking, "Will you keep me okay?" to offering, "I am already okay, and I choose to build this life with you." This shift, small as it sounds, changes the entire emotional architecture of a relationship. It replaces fear with choice, obligation with generosity, and dependency with something the Stoics would recognize as true partnership. Two complete individuals walking the same road together, neither one requiring the other to carry weight that was never theirs to carry in the first place. Number 6. Practical Stoic exercises to reclaim your own happiness. The first practical exercise is the simplest and often the most revealing. For 1 week, track how often your mood shifts in direct response to your partner's words, tone, or behavior. Don't judge what you notice, just observe it the way a Stoic would observe any pattern of thought, with calm, honest attention. You may notice you check your phone anxiously after a slightly short text, or that your entire evening plan depends on their mood when they walk through the door. This exercise isn't meant to create guilt. It's meant to create clarity, because you cannot change a pattern you haven't first honestly seen. Awareness, in Stoic practice, always comes before correction. The second exercise, drawn directly from Epictetus, is the practice of separating events from judgments in real time. When something happens, your partner seems distracted or doesn't text back quickly. Pause and ask 2 questions. What actually happened, in plain factual terms, and what story am I adding to it? Often you'll find the bare event is small and neutral, while the story you've attached, they're losing interest, something is wrong, I've done something wrong, is doing all the emotional damage. Practicing this separation, even just mentally naming it in the moment, weakens the automatic grip these stories have on your mood and returns the reaction to something closer to reason. The third exercise is rebuilding a personal morning routine that has nothing to do with your relationship. A habit, however small, that is entirely yours. This might be 10 minutes of journaling, a walk before checking your phone, reading a few pages of Stoic writing, or simply sitting quietly with a cup of coffee before the day's demands begin. The goal is to start each day from a center that belongs only to you, so that your emotional starting point isn't set by the first message or interaction you have with your partner. A stable morning ritual, practiced consistently, becomes a kind of daily proof that your peace does not require another person's permission to exist. The fourth exercise is deliberately practicing premeditatio malorum in a gentle, non-alarming way, spending a few quiet minutes occasionally imagining how you would handle a hard season, a period of distance, a serious disagreement, even the end of the relationship, should it ever come to that. This isn't meant to manufacture anxiety. It's meant to prove to yourself in advance that you would survive and continue to function, that your identity and worth would remain intact. Seneca used this exercise specifically to strip fear of its power, because fear thrives on the unexamined and shrinks considerably once it has been looked at directly, calmly, and honestly. The fifth exercise is reinvesting concretely in the other pillars of your life. Reaching out to a friend you've neglected, returning to a hobby you set aside, pursuing a personal goal that belongs entirely to you. Choose one this week and give it real time, not leftover time. This isn't about pulling away from your partner. It's about restoring the full architecture of a life that can support a relationship rather than depend on it entirely. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that he was a whole person with duties and interests beyond any single relationship or role, and reclaiming this fullness is one of the most direct ways to reduce the pressure you place on your partner to be everything. The sixth and final exercise is a nightly reflection, modeled directly on Marcus Aurelius's private journal. Before sleep, ask yourself honestly where your peace came from that day. Did it come from something you did, something you controlled, some judgment you made wisely? Or did it come entirely from your partner's mood, their attention, their approval? There's no need for self-criticism here, only honest observation, repeated night after night. Over time, this simple practice retrains your attention toward the things that are genuinely within your power, and slowly, without any dramatic turning point, you'll notice your happiness beginning to stand on its own, steady, self-sourced, and no longer waiting on anyone else's permission to exist. A relationship should be something beautiful added to an already full life, not the container your entire life depends on. Build your own peace first. Let love be a gift you give from strength, not a lifeline you reach for out of need.